Daniel stood in the shadow of the Arvani palace, his eyes lifted to the high towers that glowed like silver fire against the pale sky. The structure looked alive, its walls shifting with soft light, and every beam of its design seemed to whisper of power. It was the heart of an empire that stretched across dozens of stars, and today it was opening its doors to a human envoy for the first time. The human delegation was small, only a few chosen representatives who carried no weapons. They had been told this meeting was ceremonial, a chance to stand in the presence of the Arvani court and observe their traditions. Still, Daniel felt the weight of many eyes on him as the gates opened. Inside, the palace was more than stone and metal. It pulsed with quiet energy. The walls curved like rivers of glass, and beams of light drifted across the air as if the palace itself had a soul. Alien guards lined the way, their armor bright with markings of rank. None of them spoke, but their steady gazes followed every human step. The path led into the grand hall. It stretched wider than a stadium, its ceiling rising like a sky filled with stars. Noble families sat on high platforms, their robes flowing like streams of color. Some wore crowns of crystal. Others carried staffs that glowed faintly. Their eyes shone in hues that no human iris could match. At the center of the hall was the throne, carved from a single shard of living crystal. Upon it sat the princess of the Arvani Empire. She looked young, but there was a weight in her stillness that spoke of years hidden behind duty. Her skin shimmered faintly as though touched by moonlight, and her silver eyes watched without blinking. The hall hushed as her gaze fell upon the newcomers. The herald of the court stepped forward, his voice echoing across the chamber. He announced the arrival of the human delegation. Some nobles leaned forward with interest, others whispered among themselves. To them, humans were not equals but curiosities, a younger race still finding its place in the galaxy. Daniel stepped forward, chosen as the one to address the court. His heart pounded, but he kept his head high. He had been warned not to speak freely. The delegation had practiced only safe phrases, simple greetings of respect. Anything beyond that might be seen as an insult. The herald gestured, and Daniel approached the circle of light at the center of the hall. The silence pressed on him like a storm waiting to break. He bowed low, remembering every word of the speech he had prepared. "On behalf of my people," he said, his voice steady, "I give thanks for your welcome. May this day mark the beginning of understanding between our worlds." The words were simple, yet they stirred ripples across the chamber. Some nobles leaned back, unimpressed. Others smirked faintly. They expected humility. They expected fear. To them, humanity was not yet worthy of notice. The princess remained silent, her silver eyes fixed on him. She did not move, but Daniel felt as though she saw through his skin, reading not just his words but his very intent. The court's master of ceremony raised his staff and began the rites of exchange. It was a long chant in the Arvani tongue, full of old phrases that carried pride and history. Daniel did not understand the words, but he could hear the weight of tradition in every tone. When the chant ended, the hall turned its gaze back to him. He was expected to reply, to give another word of respect. Daniel opened his mouth, and for a moment the rehearsed speech rested on his tongue. But another memory stirred in his mind, an old phrase he had once read in a crumbling record back on Earth. It had been carved into stone, alongside star maps that no human could explain. The scholars had called it nonsense, but Daniel had remembered it. As he stood in the circle of light with the eyes of the court upon him, he almost whispered it by accident. He caught himself in time, pressing the thought back. For now he gave only the words his people had agreed upon. A safe response meant to cause no offense. Yet even in restraint, he could feel the hall watching him more closely now. The princess did not blink. Her hands rested on the throne's arms, her knuckles pale as though she waited for something unspoken. The ceremony ended with a sound of deep drums. The humans were led to seats at the edge of the hall, where they could watch but not interfere. The nobles resumed their quiet conversations, some still glancing at the human envoy with curiosity or suspicion. Daniel sat down, his heart still racing. He felt as though he had walked on the edge of a cliff. The words he had held back echoed in his mind, burning with strange weight. He did not know yet that those same words would soon shake the palace to its core. The grand hall of the Arvani palace glowed with a steady light that seemed to come from the walls themselves. The air carried a quiet hum as if the palace was alive. The human delegation sat at the edge, trying to appear calm, though every one of them felt the weight of alien eyes upon them. Daniel sat among them, his mind restless. The words he had nearly spoken still pressed against his memory, as though waiting for their moment. The nobles began to rise, one by one, to speak before the throne. They praised their empire, recited the victories of their fleets, and spoke of ancient power that had lasted for thousands of years. The crowd responded with applause, their voices rising like a tide. Daniel noticed how each speech seemed less about honor and more about pride. They wanted the humans to see their greatness and to feel small. At the center, the princess listened without a word. She remained still on her throne, her silver eyes unreadable. When each noble finished, she gave only a single nod. The hall seemed to tremble with her smallest movements, for the entire empire rested on her presence. After the nobles, the priests of the empire entered. They wore long robes with symbols shining across the fabric, patterns that shifted like water. They carried staffs that glowed at the tips, releasing faint rings of light as they walked. When they reached the circle of light in the hall, they began their chant. The sound was low at first, a murmur that rose into a deep song. The language was ancient, layered with tones that no human mouth could form. Daniel listened closely, straining to catch the rhythm. He had heard many alien tongues before, but this one stirred something deeper. It sounded like echoes from the past, a memory hidden within sound itself. As the chant grew stronger, Daniel felt a shiver run down his spine. His hand clenched on his knee, and once again the forgotten phrase whispered in his mind. It matched the rhythm, fitting into the chant as if it belonged there. He almost mouthed it silently, but he caught himself. He forced his eyes downward, afraid that if he met the gaze of the princess again, she would see the words hiding inside him. The priests finished their chant, and the hall fell silent. A single priest raised his staff high and declared that the rite of remembrance was complete. The nobles bowed, and even the princess lowered her head slightly in acknowledgement. Then the staff struck the ground, sending a ring of light across the floor. The herald turned once more toward the human delegation. His voice carried authority that seemed to echo from the walls. Let the guests speak their part. Daniel felt the air tighten. His companions looked at him, for he was chosen as their speaker. He rose slowly, his heart pounding harder than before. The circle of light awaited him again, and every eye in the hall followed as he stepped forward. When he reached the center, he stood straight and lifted his voice. I bring greetings again in respect for your ceremony. My people are honored to stand as witnesses to your traditions. We come in peace, and we offer friendship if it is your wish. The words were correct. They were safe. Yet they sounded hollow in his ears. He felt the weight of the moment pressing harder. The nobles murmured to one another, unimpressed by such simple speech. Some smirked, others shook their heads. They expected nothing more from humans. The herald nodded faintly, ready to dismiss him, but then Daniel's eyes flicked upward. The princess was staring at him again, her gaze sharp, unblinking. For the first time, her fingers gripped the arms of her throne. It was as if she expected something, as if she waited for him to say more. The silence stretched too long. Daniel's mouth went dry. Against his will, the memory returned again, the strange phrase carved into stone back on Earth. He had found it in an old archive when preparing for this journey. The scholars had laughed at it, saying it was meaningless. But now, standing in this hall, surrounded by a language that carried the same echoes, he felt certain it had meaning. The words pressed forward. His tongue formed their shape before he could stop it. He spoke them clearly, his voice ringing through the chamber. At once, the hall froze. The nobles gasped, their robes rustling as they turned in shock. The priests stiffened, their glowing staffs dimming. Even the herald stepped back, his face pale with disbelief. On the throne, the princess went utterly still. Her silver eyes widened, and her lips parted as though she had seen a ghost. She rose from her seat slowly, her body trembling. For the first time since the humans had entered the palace, the princess showed true emotion. The hall erupted in whispers, some in fear, others in anger. Nobles demanded to know how a human could speak those words. Guards shifted uneasily, waiting for orders. But the princess did not speak. She stared at Daniel, frozen in shock, unable to hide the truth written in her eyes. Daniel stood in the circle of light, his heart pounding louder than the noise around him. He did not understand what he had done, but he knew one thing with certainty. The words were not meaningless. They carried power, and the entire palace had felt it. The grand hall of the palace was no longer calm. What had begun as a display of pride and tradition had turned into confusion and alarm. The forbidden words Daniel had spoken still echoed through the air, hanging heavy like a storm cloud. The nobles leaned forward in their seats, their faces twisted in disbelief. Some pointed at Daniel, shouting that it was impossible. Others whispered in hushed voices, afraid even to repeat what they had heard. The priests clutched their staffs, their glowing lights flickering weakly as if their strength had been drained by the sound of the phrase. The guards tightened their grip on their weapons. A few even stepped forward, ready to seize the human envoy. Yet none of them moved without a command from the throne. All eyes turned to the princess. She stood tall now, her silver eyes locked on Daniel. For a moment she seemed unable to breathe. Her lips trembled slightly, and her hands shook as they hovered above the arms of her crystal throne. Then in a voice softer than a whisper she spoke. "Where did you learn those words?" The question carried across the hall like a command. The nobles fell silent at once. The humans shifted uneasily in their seats, realizing that the situation had grown far more serious than expected. Daniel swallowed hard. His throat was dry, but he forced himself to speak. "I found them in an old record, a stone tablet discovered on Earth. No one knew what it meant. I only remembered the shape of the words. The reaction was immediate. A roar of voices filled the chamber. The nobles shouted that it was a lie, that no human could ever know the sacred oath of the Arvani. The priests cried out that the words had been locked away for centuries, forbidden to all, even within the empire itself. The guards took another step forward, their armor clashing in unison, but the princess raised her hand. At once silence returned. She took a slow breath, her gaze never leaving Daniel. "Those words," she said, "are not common. They belong to the first oath, spoken only by the rulers of my people. No one beyond the royal line was ever permitted to hear them. Speaking them without right is punishable by death." The hall gasped. The humans froze in fear, their faces pale. Daniel's heart pounded, but he did not look away. He could not explain how he knew the words, yet he felt something deeper stirring within him. "I did not mean disrespect," Daniel said, his voice firm though his body trembled. "I spoke them without knowing their full meaning. If I have offended, I ask forgiveness." The nobles shouted again, this time louder. They demanded his immediate execution. Some accused the humans of deception, saying their kind had come not as guests but as spies. The priests insisted the human's life be taken at once, for the forbidden words could not be spoken without consequence. Yet the princess did not move to condemn him. She studied him carefully, her eyes narrowing with thought. There was something about his tone, something in the way the words had left his lips. It was not mockery. It was not theft. It was as if he had carried them unknowingly for years, waiting for this very moment. At last she spoke again. "Leave us," she commanded. The hall filled with protest, but none dared defy her. The nobles rose reluctantly. The priests lowered their heads in anger. The guards hesitated before retreating to the far walls. Soon only the princess, Daniel, and a handful of attendants remained in the great chamber. She stepped down from her throne, her long robes gliding across the glowing floor. Each step echoed as if the palace itself was listening. She stopped only a few paces away from Daniel, close enough that he could see the faint shimmer of light in her skin. "You speak the oath of my ancestors," she said quietly. "Do you understand what that means?" Daniel shook his head. "No. I only know it was carved into stone on my world. I thought it was nothing more than an old phrase from a forgotten language." Her expression darkened with conflict. "It is more than a phrase. It is the binding oath of the Arvani throne, the promise that unites my people. No one outside my family has spoken it for 1,000 years. For you to speak it now is impossible." Daniel felt the truth pressing closer, though he did not yet understand it. "Then why do I know it?" he asked softly. The princess turned away, her gaze distant. "Perhaps because the past we buried was not as forgotten as we believed." She lifted her hand to silence him before he could ask more. "You must not speak of this again. Not before the court, not before anyone. If the nobles believe you to be a threat, they will demand your death, and I will not be able to protect you a second time." Daniel nodded slowly, though the weight of the mystery pressed heavier than before. He had come to the palace as a guest, but now he was something else, something the Arvani feared yet could not ignore. The princess returned to her throne. Her voice carried once more across the hall. "The ceremony is concluded. Our guests will be shown to their quarters." The guards moved forward again, this time not as executioners but as escorts. The nobles outside grumbled in protest, but none dared challenge the command of their princess. As Daniel was led away, he glanced back. The princess was seated again, her posture regal, her face calm. Yet her eyes followed him until the doors closed. In those eyes, Daniel saw not anger but fear, and a question that would not fade. The heavy doors of the grand hall closed behind the human envoy, leaving the echoes of protest from the nobles outside. The princess sat on her crystal throne, her face calm, but her thoughts restless. Her hands trembled faintly against the smooth arms of the seat, though she hid the movement from the attendants still in the hall. The words she had heard from Daniel were impossible, yet they were real. The forbidden oath had not been spoken in the palace for generations. It was a secret carried only within the royal family, whispered from one ruler to the next in quiet chambers far from curious ears. It was not a phrase of worship or praise. It was a binding promise, an agreement made in the earliest days of the empire. To hear it from the mouth of a human was more than shocking, it was dangerous. When the last attendant left, the princess stood and walked slowly to the edge of the throne platform. Her silver eyes were troubled, but her steps remained steady. She ordered her personal guard to bring Daniel to a private chamber, once the other humans were settled. Her voice was firm, but inside her chest her heart beat faster than ever before. Meanwhile, Daniel was escorted through the palace halls by silent guards. The walls shimmered with faint colors, their designs shifting like flowing water. Every step echoed, and he felt as though the palace itself was watching him. His companions whispered behind him, asking what had happened, but he gave no answer. He himself did not understand. At last he was separated from the rest and led down a narrow corridor to a chamber lit by a soft glow. The guards opened the door and pushed him gently inside before closing it again. Daniel found himself standing in a quiet room with walls of crystal and a high ceiling that seemed to glow with starlight. The princess was already there, waiting. She had removed the heavy crown from her head, and her long robes flowed more simply now. Without the full weight of ceremony, she looked younger, more human in her stillness. Yet her silver eyes still carried the same power, sharp and unblinking. Daniel bowed slightly. "Your Highness?" The princess raised her hand, stopping him from speaking further. "You will tell me exactly where you learned those words." Daniel straightened, his voice steady but uncertain. "As I said before, I found them on a stone tablet. It was unearthed years ago in a forgotten ruin on Earth. Scholars could not translate it, but I memorized the marks. I did not know they were yours." She studied him in silence, her gaze piercing. "The tablet you describe should not exist. Those words were given only to the first rulers of my people. They were never meant to leave this world." Daniel hesitated. "Then how did they reach mine?" The princess turned away, her hands clasped before her. Her voice dropped lower, almost a whisper. "Because long ago our empire was not alone. We walked among other stars and we made promises. Some of those promises were broken and some were buried. Perhaps your world carries the fragments of one such vow." Daniel listened carefully, his heart racing. The idea that humans had once been tied to the Empire's earliest history seemed impossible. Yet the evidence was clear in his memory. The princess faced him again. "You must understand the danger. If the nobles believe you hold knowledge of the oath, they will see you as a threat to the throne. They will not rest until you are silenced. I protected you once, but I cannot shield you forever." Daniel nodded slowly. "I did not come here to threaten anyone. I only wanted to honor your traditions. If I had known the meaning of those words, I would never have spoken them aloud." Her eyes softened slightly, though her voice remained firm. "Intentions matter little in this court. Appearances are stronger than truth. They will twist what you did into a reason for fear." She paced the chamber, her robes brushing softly against the glowing floor. "There are those who already doubt my strength. They wait for a reason to rise against me. If they claim I allowed a human to mock our most sacred oath, they will have the weapon they need." Daniel frowned. "Then why not let them believe I was a fool with no knowledge? Why risk speaking with me here?" The princess paused, her gaze fixed on him once more. For the first time, her expression revealed something deeper than command. There was curiosity and perhaps a glimmer of hope. "Because when you spoke the oath," she said slowly, "you spoke it correctly. No outsider could have shaped the words so true. That is what frightens me most. You should not know them. yet you carried them as if they belonged to you. Daniel stood silent, unable to answer. The truth was, he did not know how the words had come to him so easily. It was as if they had been waiting in his memory for this very moment. The princess moved closer, her eyes steady on his. I do not yet know what you are, human envoy. But I know this. You are more than you claim to be, and whether you intend it or not, you have become part of a secret that could change my empire. The chamber grew silent again. Only the faint hum of the palace filled the air. Daniel felt the weight of her words settle upon him like a cloak. He had stepped into the palace as an observer, yet now he was drawn into the heart of its most guarded mystery. The princess turned away, her voice low but commanding. You will remain under my watch. You will not leave these walls until I decide what to do. Speak to no one of the oath. If you value your life, you will obey. Daniel bowed his head. I understand. As the guards returned to escort him, Daniel caught one last look at the princess. Her face was calm again, her royal mask restored. But her eyes told another story. They held a question that even she could not answer. Why had fate placed those forbidden words in the mouth of a human? Daniel's quarters in the palace were beautiful, yet they felt like a cage. The walls glowed with soft light, and the floor shimmered faintly under his steps, but the doors remained guarded day and night. He was treated with respect, offered food and comfort, yet he knew he was a prisoner. His companions were housed elsewhere, kept apart to prevent them from sharing too much. Daniel spent hours staring at the patterns on the walls, thinking of the forbidden words he had spoken. He could still feel them on his tongue, heavy with meaning he did not understand. Why would the oath of an alien empire be carved into stone on Earth? How had it survived across the stars? The questions gave him no rest. Late one evening, the door opened and the princess entered with only 2 guards. She dismissed them with a quiet order, leaving her alone with Daniel. Her robes were lighter than before, not ceremonial but simple, and her silver eyes seemed more human in the gentle glow. You are unsettled, she said softly. Daniel stood. You have locked me here without answers. Anyone would be unsettled. Her lips curved faintly, not quite a smile. Fair enough. Then tonight I will give you some answers. But understand this, what I share could place both of us in danger. Daniel nodded quickly. I need to know, please. The princess walked to the far wall and touched it with her palm. The crystal shimmered and the surface shifted to reveal a hidden door. She led him down a narrow corridor, away from the guarded halls until they entered a chamber deep within the palace. The room was filled with ancient objects, scrolls sealed in glass, carvings of strange symbols, fragments of stone older than the empire itself. This is the archive of the first rulers, she explained. Few know of it. Fewer still are allowed inside. What I tell you now is forbidden to the court. Daniel's eyes widened as he stepped closer to the artifacts. The carvings on some of the stones looked familiar. He ran his fingers lightly over one piece and froze. The markings were the same as those on the tablet he had seen on Earth. The princess watched his reaction carefully. You see now why your words shook me. Your world should not have carried this language, yet it does. Which means our past is tied more closely than I was taught. Daniel turned toward her. So humans and Arvani met before? Long ago? She hesitated, then nodded. Yes. Long before my empire rose to its full strength, my people traveled far. We sought alliances and knowledge. Your world was one we visited. Promises were made, words were shared. But something happened. The records say the bond was broken, and the truth was hidden. The nobles buried it, claiming it was weakness to admit we once stood beside others as equals. Daniel felt a chill. So the oath was not just for your empire. It was a bond with us too. Her eyes narrowed. Perhaps. Or perhaps it was something greater. My ancestors swore it to a people they respected. If humans were part of that vow, then your presence here is no accident. The weight of her words pressed on Daniel. He remembered the mocking laughter of the scholars back on Earth when he had studied the strange tablet. None of them had believed it mattered. And yet here, in the heart of the Arvani palace, it had changed everything. The princess moved closer, lowering her voice. If the nobles discover this truth, they will destroy it. They will destroy you. They would rather erase history than admit their empire was built on shared ground. That is why I must decide carefully what to do with you. Daniel met her gaze, steady despite the fear inside him. Then decide this. Do you trust me? The room grew still. Her silver eyes searched his face as if weighing the honesty in his words. At last she spoke, her voice quiet but clear. I want to. But trust is dangerous here. My enemies are many and they wait for weakness, Daniel nodded. Then let me help you. If our pasts are connected, maybe together we can uncover the truth. I don't want power. I only want to understand. The princess looked away, her expression unreadable. She walked to a tall crystal pillar in the center of the chamber and pressed her hand against it. The pillar lit with soft light, revealing a hidden map of stars. Some shone bright, others faded like dying embers. This map shows the worlds of the First Alliance, she said. Your Earth is marked here, though its name is different. That is proof your people once stood with mine. But if this is revealed, the court will call it treason. They will say I betrayed the Empire by listening to you. Daniel stared at the glowing map, his heart pounding. Then what will you do? She turned back to him, her eyes fierce now. For the moment I will keep this secret, but secrets cannot remain buried forever. The oath you spoke has awakened a shadow of the past, and once awakened, shadows do not fade. Silence filled the chamber. The princess placed the map back into hiding and motioned for Daniel to follow her. As they walked back toward his quarters, Daniel felt the weight of destiny pressing upon his shoulders. He had come here as a guest, but now he was part of something far older and far greater than he could have imagined. When the guards returned to their posts outside his door, Daniel stood alone once more. Yet his heart no longer felt uncertain. He understood now that the forbidden words were not a mistake. They were a key to history, and perhaps to the future of both their peoples. The next day in the palace was restless. Whispers spread across the marble halls and glowing corridors like fire in dry grass. Every noble who had seen Daniel speak the forbidden words carried the story to their allies. By the time the sun rose over the shining towers, the whole court buzzed with rumor and fear. Daniel remained in his chamber, watched by guards who never left their posts. He felt the change in the air even without hearing the words. Servants who once bowed politely now avoided his eyes. The guards shifted more often, their grips on their weapons tighter than before. He knew he had become the center of something larger than himself. In the grand hall, the nobles gathered in a storm of voices. Their robes of color and crystal shimmered as they argued. Some demanded that Daniel be executed at once to protect the throne. Others whispered that perhaps the event carried meaning, though they dared not say so too loudly. The priests, their staffs glowing with sharp light, declared that the oath had been broken, and that punishment must be swift. The princess entered in silence, her presence drawing all voices to a halt. She walked to her throne and sat with calm dignity, though inside her thoughts clashed like blades. She had spent the night in deep reflection. She knew the court was ready to turn against her if she showed weakness. Yet she also knew Daniel's words could not be erased. A noble with a tall crown stood. His voice rang through the hall. Your Highness, we cannot ignore what happened. A human has spoken words forbidden even to us. Such knowledge is dangerous. Such an insult demands justice, the crowd roared in agreement. Another noble added, if we allow this outsider to live, it will show that our throne can be mocked without consequence. The empire will appear weak. The princess raised her hand. The noise fell away, though anger still glimmered in many eyes. The human did not mock us, she said firmly. He did not even know the meaning of what he spoke. He found the words on his own world, carved in stone. That is what troubles me most. Her voice carried strength, but it did not silence doubt. A priest stepped forward, his staff glowing brighter. Then his world must be corrupted by secrets that were never meant to leave Arvani hands. If his people carry our oath, then they are a threat to us all. Daniel, hearing of the meeting later through whispers of servants, understood that his fate was hanging by a thread. He could only wait, locked in his chamber, while the court debated his life. Inside the hall, the princess stood from her throne, a rare gesture that drew every gaze. You call him a threat, yet you do not ask why the words survived beyond our stars. You call for his death, yet you fear what his voice has awakened. Killing him will not erase the truth. It will only blind us to it, the nobles murmured, some unsettled by her reasoning. Others grew more hostile. The tall-crowned noble struck the floor with his staff. Truth or not, we cannot risk rebellion. Already the lower houses whisper that your rule is shaken. Already they wonder if you have grown too soft. Protecting this human will be seen as weakness, and weakness will destroy us. The princess met his gaze coldly. And slaughtering a guest will not? The chamber fell silent again. It was a dangerous game she played, walking between her duty as ruler and the storm of tradition. She knew some of these nobles longed for her fall, and they would use Daniel as their weapon if she faltered. Later that evening, she called Daniel once more to the private chamber. The guards left them alone, though their unease lingered outside. Daniel entered with careful steps, bowing his head. "You know they want me dead," he said quietly. The princess did not deny it. "Yes, they see you as a spark that could set fire to all we have built. They will not rest until the spark is gone, but I will not give them what they want so easily." Daniel frowned. "Why risk yourself for me? You could end this trouble with one order." Her voice softened. "Because I have seen the fear in their eyes. Not fear of you, but of what you represent. If the oath was once shared with your people, then my empire is not built on the truth they believe. That frightens them more than you ever could." Daniel listened, his chest heavy with the weight of her words. "Then what happens next?" She paced slowly across the glowing floor. "Next, we must move carefully. I will not reveal the full truth yet. If I stand against the nobles too soon, they will tear the empire apart, but neither can I allow them to destroy you. You are part of this mystery now and perhaps part of its answer." Daniel's heart pounded. "So you will keep me alive?" Her silver eyes met his. "As long as I can, but you must help me. You must be cautious with your words and actions. Every step you take in this palace is watched. Every breath you draw is weighed as proof of either threat or worth." He nodded firmly. "Then I will not fail you." For a moment, the mask of the ruler faded, and she looked at him not as a princess, but as someone who carried a heavy burden. "I hope you will not," she said softly. That night, as Daniel returned to his guarded quarters, the palace seemed more restless than ever. The halls whispered with schemes. The nobles plotted, the priests sharpened their warnings, and the guards shifted uneasily, caught between loyalty and fear. The tension was growing like a storm above the empire. And at its center stood a human who had spoken words no outsider was meant to know, and a princess who had chosen not to condemn him. The palace was alive with tension. Rumors of Daniel's forbidden words had spread through every hall, every chamber, every corridor. Nobles whispered behind closed doors, priests debated with hushed anger, and guards stood on edge, unsure of what command would come next. The grand hall awaited its next moment of judgment, and the empire seemed to hold its breath. The princess, seated on her crystal throne, observed the storm quietly. Her silver eyes were calm, yet inside her mind raced. She had spent countless hours weighing every possible outcome, calculating the moves of the nobles and the court's reaction. One false step could destroy her rule. One careless command could cost Daniel his life. And yet the words he had spoken were not just mistakes. They were a spark, a signal from the past, a reminder that the empire's history was far more complex than anyone dared admit. The nobles gathered once again, robes flowing and staffs glowing. They were unified in outrage, their voices rising in unison. "Your Highness," a tall noble called, "the human must be punished. He has spoken the sacred oath of the Arvani. No outsider has ever dared. To protect him is to weaken the throne." The princess raised her hand and silence fell. Her voice was steady, carrying a weight that demanded attention. "He spoke words he did not understand," she said. "No insult was meant, no harm intended. The truth is not in his intention, but in what the words reveal. Our history is larger than we know. To destroy him is to destroy the chance to understand our past." Murmurs rippled through the hall. Some nobles frowned, seeing her words as weakness. Others leaned forward, curious despite themselves. This was a princess who dared defy centuries of tradition, who questioned the authority of history itself. A priest stepped forward, his staff glowing brighter. "Your Highness, the sacred oath is not a toy. It binds generations. He is a human. How can he possibly carry such power without consequence?" The princess met his gaze. "And yet he does. And yet he has shown nothing but respect. Do we destroy someone who awakens the truth, or do we embrace what it reveals?" The court grew silent. Even the nobles could not ignore the quiet logic in her words. The storm of anger was still there, but it wavered, unsure of which side to follow. The princess stood fully, her robes flowing like liquid silver. She lifted her hand, not in threat but in command. "I will speak the oath myself, and I will speak it with him in the presence of the court. If these words are dangerous, let them see their power. If they are a bridge to our past, let them witness it." Gasps filled the hall. Many expected defiance, yet she walked down from her throne, her steps measured, her posture proud. Daniel was brought forward, escorted into the circle of light once more. His heart pounded, but he held his head high. He knew the risk. He knew the court could still turn against him. The princess stopped a few paces from him. "Repeat the oath with me," she said, her voice firm. "Do so clearly, with respect. Let all hear its meaning." Daniel nodded. He inhaled deeply, recalling every sound, every rhythm of the forbidden words. His voice rang through the hall, clear and steady. The nobles leaned forward. The priests paused, and the court held its breath. The princess spoke alongside him, her voice carrying the weight of centuries. The words were old, strange, and beautiful. They were a promise, a bond, a memory awakened from the past. As they spoke, the hall felt the shift. The glowing walls seemed to hum with recognition. The air vibrated softly, as though the palace itself was alive to the sound. When the oath ended, silence filled the chamber. No one moved. No one spoke. The nobles who had called for his death looked uncertain. The priests lowered their staffs. The guards relaxed, though only slightly. The princess lifted her voice. "This is our past. These words are not merely law or tradition. They are a reminder that our empire did not grow alone. The human who spoke them today has reminded us that knowledge, respect, and bonds can cross worlds. Let this be a lesson, not a cause for fear." Slowly, applause began. One noble clapped, then another. The sound grew until the entire court echoed with it. Some were moved by the revelation. Some remained wary, but none could deny the power of what had been revealed. Daniel looked at the princess, awe and gratitude in his eyes. "I did not know what I was doing," he said quietly. She smiled faintly. "Intentions matter less than the truth they uncover. Today you have not only survived, you have opened a door for our peoples." For the first time, the court felt a shift in power. It was subtle, but undeniable. The nobles and priests realized that the empire could move forward, not by hiding its history, but by embracing it. And at the center of this change stood a human, once an outsider, now part of their destiny. The princess returned to her throne, calm and commanding once more. Yet she watched Daniel with a new understanding. He was no longer merely a guest. He was a bridge between the empire's past and its future, a symbol of what could happen when fear was replaced by respect. The palace had been shocked, the forbidden words had been spoken, and the empire would never be the same. And as the stars outside the glowing walls twinkled, Daniel realized that he had stepped into history, not as an observer, but as a part of it. The court, the nobles, and the priests could resist it or embrace it. But the choice of the princess and the courage of one human had changed the course of their future forever.